Well, some strong criticism over the NHI. Eventually, this whole charade will collapse. That's the view of Business Leadership South Africa CEO Busi Mavuso on the recently passed Insurance Health Bill. The proposed legislation, which still needs to go through the NCOP before being sent to the President to be signed into law, seeks to create universal health care in the country. Mavuso joins us for more on this contentious bill. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Before we get into the NHI, I think are there any reflections from business on the role that South Africa played in this trip that our President undertook with other African leaders to try and mitigate or broker peace between Russia and Ukraine, and using the argument that African economies have suffered a great deal as a result of this conflict?
Kathy, look, I think that is yet another stunt by government where they are doing things for optics. I don't understand what the South African government thought they could offer to Russia and to Ukraine, because then if you're brokering a peace deal, you have to have something to offer to both countries, and that for me is still not clear. You know, what exactly was our value proposition? What were we hoping to achieve? And more importantly, as I've said, what were we going to offer to Ukraine in particular, you know, in terms of where they find themselves? I really think that this was just a stance where government was hoping to prove its a neutral stance, you know, and they went to this lens, you know, to prove that they are indeed neutral. But I think I don't think they are fooling anyone. Everyone can see that government is not neutral when it comes to its relations with Russia, and I think it was just a waste of time, and it's not going to achieve anything.
All right. Of course, we also have a very important matter through the NHI and this bill being passed in Parliament last week. The biggest concerns that you as business in this country have, also I would imagine being mindful of the fact that the bill in its current state will very much still evolve, at least to the point that it gets to the President's desk.
It is still going to evolve to the point where it gets to the President's desk. But I think its evolution from here on doesn't mean much. I think the way the entire thing has been conceived, you know, it is not workable. We know very well that we're putting a bill in place that we're not going to be able to implement. We're putting a bill in place that we're not going to be able to fund. We're putting a bill in place where we know very well that the infrastructure, you know, and the system of government as it stands, you know, the disastrous public healthcare system is not going to be able to make sure that the delivery and implementation of this thing happens as it is actually supposed to happen. I think in our minds, Kathy, we are thinking that we are doing what is right from a signaling perspective. We are thinking that we are convincing the electorate by saying that we are putting positive interventions in place that are going to benefit the broader South African public. You know, I think it is the same stance that government pulled, you know, with the free higher education system. And where did that end up? You know, so it's very problematic, because once you put something like this into law, you know, you therefore force the National Treasury to try and find ways in which to fund it. And we know very well that we can't fund it from the first cut. You know, the first cut as it is very constrained. You know, for you to be able to fund this thing, you're going to have to be able to get money from somewhere. And what alternatives do we have really? Because this is not something that you can raise debt for, you know, in order to fund. The only option that you have is to actually increase your tax base and make sure that you get enough taxes from the public. But how are you going to do that when you're sitting in an environment where we've got minimal foreign investment coming in? And you've got minimal foreign investment coming in because our trading environment is not conducive. Our trading environment is not conducive because energy is disastrous. Transport and logistics is a disaster. Crime and corruption is a disaster. You know, the broader public infrastructure, you know, network industries that are supposed to make sure, you know, that ours is a conducive environment are not functioning. So how do we really hope to pull this off? So it is very worrying, and I think what we are hoping for as business is to say that we are currently working with government on energy, transport, and logistics, and crime and corruption. Why don't we add healthcare as a fourth work stream where business can actually give its capability, its resources, its funding, its infrastructure, its systems to try and look at this bill and make sure that it is workable. Because in its current state, this thing is not workable. The reason why they don't have an implementation plan is because implementation is possible, or rather is impossible, in terms of how the bill stands. And the reason why there's no funding plan with this thing is because the funding of it is impossible. So I think instead of signaling, and playing politics with people, let's rather put it in an environment where we can really come up with a workable solution and a workable bill, so that we can promise South Africans something that we know we can deliver. Because at the moment, I think we are promising things that we know very well that we are not going to be able to do.
That's been one of the suggestions put on the table, to go back to some of the cooperation that took place under COVID-19 between the public and the private sector, and really draw insight from the best in the country, and knowledge from the best in terms of how to close some of the gaps. And, there may be a lot of questionable issues around the NHI. Do you not see it as a significant step, or at least as a starting point to at least providing universal health care, even though the bill is very much around the funding of that and not fundamentally about universal health care?
And it definitely is a positive step, Kathy. I think that is why business is fully in support of the NHI, and I think we have come up saying exactly that. We have every interest in seeing universal healthcare coverage in South Africa, because we know that universal healthcare coverage seeks to address the vast inequalities that we have in this country, and that is critical. But for it to can be able to do that, it must be sustainable, and it needs to be provided in a way that best uses the scarce resources of the state. And we are saying that this thing as it stands is not going to be able to do that. Now, what government is proposing here is a monopoly model, which is already failing in the public healthcare sector system, or rather a monopoly model that has already failed in so many areas of public services. Where we are right now as a country is government realizing the importance of having PPP models in all areas of the economy. Whether it's in transport and logistics, or in energy, or in what we're doing with the SAA. We are at the moment reversing the monopolies that we have before, because we see the value that is actually being brought in by the private sector. Now, you have seen the blending of public and private cover that has been done successfully elsewhere in the world, where the public healthcare system works alongside the private sector, or rather the private service providers. The NHI proposed at the moment is not that. And we are saying, why can't we actually explore that model? Why can't we go back, as you rightfully say, to the COVID model, where we look at this thing and we say we need to deliver this for the 65 million South Africans? Instead of thinking that you are going to implement an NHI and in the process collapse the private healthcare system, we know that that is not going to work. Why can't these two, work in tandem and work alongside each other? And that is the proposal that we're actually making to government, instead of this populist intervention that they are putting in place, knowing fully well that it's actually not workable and they are not going to be able to fund it. It's pointless putting a bill in place, Kathy, that you know very well you've got no plan, of making sure that you implement it, because who are you fooling?
All right. Business Leadership South Africa CEO Busi Mavuso on the recently passed NHI Bill. So absolutely no confidence then in the ability of government where that bill is concerned.